The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. There was a scholar of the law who stood up to test Jesus and said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" He said in reply, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." He replied to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But because he wished to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man fell victim to robbers as he went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. They stripped and beat him and went off, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. Likewise, a Levite came to the place, and when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. But a Samaritan traveler who came upon him was moved with compassion at the sight. He approached the victim, poured oil and wine over his wounds, and bandaged them. Then he lifted him up on his own animal, took him to an inn, and cared for him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper with the instruction, 'Take care of him. If you spend more than what I have given you, I shall repay you on my way back.' Which of these 3, in your opinion, was neighbor to the robber's victim?" He answered, "The one who treated him with mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, there's a lot going on today. What great riches we have in the Scriptures. The beginning of the book of Jonah. So we have an opportunity to go back to that at some point. So that's one of my favorites. So I'm going to pass that one up, and we'll go to the Gospel. It's a fascinating interaction that Jesus has with this scholar of the law, and it's a table-turning event in its own right. It's again a tremendous story. There's so much to say about it. I mean, there's these 2 Jews that pass by on the opposite side. I always have to say, they're going even in the parable. They're going to Jerusalem. We assume they're going to the temple, and going to the temple, they cannot contract ritual impurity. And if the person lying half dead by the side of the road looks half dead, you don't want to go and touch the corpse. Your whole journey at that point is in vain. At least that's what Jesus is giving us, is kind of like this stark image of the people who pass by on the opposite side do not want, and we can understand, we actually can identify with them. They do not, and the scholar of the law will identify with them as well, that they pass by on the opposite side in order to not contract ritual impurity. But what they've done is they've then forsaken the command of God to charity, to love. I mean, just as he's given this the scholar has given this great response to Jesus. What's written in the law? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. Okay. The other point of clarification that I have to offer is, the scholar of the law is not asking the question that you think he's asking. So he asks, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" What he's really asking is, what must I do to, let me say 2 ways. What must I do to have life in the age to come? Or what must I do to live into the age to come? So it doesn't mean, how do I go to heaven when I die? So tell me, give me the score sheet, and I'll check the boxes. Then when I die, I'm going to go to heaven. That's not right. What it is how do I live into the age where God is ruling? Right? So the promise is that God is going to return to his people and rule. And then the whole world will come under God's rule. Well, how do I live into that? right? How do I find my place in that? How do I find life in that? How do I make sure that I'm in that story? So don't take this and make it your own story with your own philosophical pre-commitments. That's what's going on here. The age to come, God's rule, and the rest. How do I do that? Now, it's a particularly important question because in Jesus, that rule is coming to birth on earth as it is in heaven. So Jesus is the ushering in of the new age of God's rule. So, of course, it makes sense to come to him, ask him that question. Because he's the king, he's the Messiah at the head of his people, moving into, living into, leading the way into this age of God's perfect rule. So how do I do that? And then there's obviously components here, right? It's like, well, how do I make sure that I'm straight? And how do I make sure then that my activities, my actions, and the rest, what I'm caught up in doing and whatever, conduces to the time where God rules? And then Jesus gives us this great story in response to, this kind of, this question about who is my neighbor implicates what he's already asked. Right? So here in Luke's gospel, we see in a particularly heightened way, I would say, the fact that God's grace is for all. God's grace is for all. Right? So it's in this gospel more than most that I will give you that frame of reference to say there is an us and there is a them, but the relationship between the us, right, the in-group, the Israel or the new Israel, and the them, the pagans or the world or the nations or whatever, is that it's us for them, not us against them. And what comes out again in this with the scholar of the law is an us over and against them mentality that he's proposing and trying to smoke Jesus out on his heretical views. Right? If Jesus says, look, Israel doesn't matter. God's grace is for all. So there's no place for Israel at this point. Just God's grace, without distinction for all. But he doesn't say that, right? He says, no, okay, Israel's vocation is to be the light to the nations. This is a new Israel movement. So my people, the new Israel, the people gathered to me that I've called and I'm equipping, are equipped to be the blessing for the world. So there is an us, but it's us for them. But of course, right, the scholar of the law thinks he's found his high ground. He thinks okay, I can do all those things. Who's my neighbor? I'll go and do it. Kind of, right? It's like, who's my neighbor? He wants Jesus to say, your neighbor, the person to whom you are obliged, the person that you must serve, is your fellow Jew. That's what this scholar of the law believes. And so how do you make any headway with that conversation? Well, what does Jesus do? Flips it on its head. And he puts the scholar of the law, or he puts the Jew in the position of need. See, the scholar of the law, his position is one of luxury, isn't it? Well, yeah, I've done everything. So I'm going to be in the rule of God. That's fine. I've done everything already. And tell me, show me who is my neighbor, and I'll do a little bit of thing, whatever, right? This is not. And then Jesus says, okay, but what happens when you're in a position of right? When you're in desperate need, when you are lying in the ditch, when you are half dead, and your fellow Jew will not even think to touch you for fear that he will contract ritual impurity. Okay, well, I kind of need the Samaritan at that point, right? The hated, despised Samaritan, the one who has a claim, a competitive claim for the land, for the promised land, right? Like, I hate that guy with everything I've got, but he's the one who picked you out of the gutter, right? So he's turned it upside down. Who was neighbor to him? Who was neighbor to the robber's victim? The hated Samaritan. Go and do likewise. He said the one who treated him with mercy. So, okay, more so because the man is a member of the house of Israel. And do we have a sense that he's part of the renewed Israel, Jesus' new Israel movement? He's been given the command to show mercy. And that's enough. That's enough. Right? It's not a matter of what distinctions we're making. There is us versus them. There is us and them. But how do we view the us and the them? It's us for them. And we need to apply this more and more. Right? We can say, each and every one of us can say, we're blessed. I've been called. Despite my unworthiness, despite my incapacity, right? I have nothing to hold out before God to say, hey, this is why you should call me. No, He's called me. And perhaps all the more because I don't have any merits to plead my cause. Right? He's called me. And it's a sheer act of mercy that He has called me to Himself, that He's called me into His service. And now it's mine to give myself away in His service, to live totally for Him and His purposes. And guess what? Whenever we find ourselves in this position, my gosh, you can almost feel it in the passage. Like the man is trying to justify himself over and against Jesus. That's not a good position to be in. It's like whenever we find ourselves like trying to build ourselves up, claim moral high ground, what are we doing? We're called to serve. It means we've got to get down. We've got to go low. I'm not going to stand up on our moral high ground and shout at people down below, hey, you've got to be doing, hey, you know what you've got to be doing? This is nonsense. This is the way that people on the outside view the church because, can I say, we've lived into that pattern for too long. We have to serve. Right? What do we have that we haven't been given by God? So what do we have that we will not give in his service and for His cause? Right? We've got to go. We've got to serve. We've got to love. We've got to show mercy. And this is it. Whatever we have in our heads, and as you go about your day, think about it. Whatever we have in our heads that is preventing us from showing mercy, from bringing God's love to life, where we are, we've got to go the other way. We've got to pick up or root out or whatever. We've got to go the other way because we have to be about the work of Christ. He's called us. He's inspiring us. He's equipping us. He's sending us to go and do likewise.